If you know anything about Project M, you've probably heard of ThundeRzReign. He's the only player to have been ranked as the best player in the world for 2 consecutive years in a row, and he's generally considered to be the greatest Project M 3.6 player of all time, and I ranked him as such in my ranking of Project M 3.6 players from 2015 to 2019. It's a very easy narrative to tell that from his rise in the middle of 2016 on, Thunders was just the best player in the world, and he was always number one, even though sometimes people were beating him, that he was always the better player. And that's a narrative that I at times have fed into, but I think it's really interesting to talk about how close those races were to number one at any given point in time, because the thing that makes Thunders the greatest player of all time isn't that he always held dominant records over the other people challenging him, or even that he was winning most of the majors at any given point. It was his ability to win the events that mattered. For the 3 years of PM rank that focused exclusively on 3.6, he was ranked first on 2 of them, and then was ranked 4th in 2018, after attending only 4 events and sandbagging at 2 of them. I would make the case that by the end of 2018, he was actually the best player in the world for that year as well. But at no point was he considered the favorite going into the end of the year for any of those years, and that's what makes his story so compelling. Let's start with 2016. Going into Olympus, which was the circuit finale for the Project M 2016 competitive circuit, ThundeRzReign had won 1 major, Low Tier City 4. This put him in a category of players like Sosa, Flip, Malachi, Mr. Els, and Emu Killer who had all won big events in 2016. They were all behind Junebug in terms of circuit points, who also had 2 major wins, but June had a lot of surprising losses towards the second half of the year, which really meant that the race for first place was wide open going into Olympus, with all of those players who had all won majors, as well as Lunchables, who had a ton of second place finishes. Thunders was not the number 1 seed going into Olympus. He was actually the 4th seed, and had losing or even records to all of the players above him at the time. Say what you will about his victory at Olympus, he did not have an easy bracket. In Winners Semis, he faced off against Junebug, against whom he had a 1-3 record, and even after beating him for the first time at Low Tier City 4, he lost their next set at EVO pretty solidly. He 4-stalked him in Game 1, and it's a dominant 3-0. Then he plays Lunchables, against whom he has a 2-2 record, beats him cleanly, and then in Grand Finals, Lunchables comes back with a vengeance. He 3-0s him in dominant fashion. Thunders tries Falcon on Game 3, it doesn't seem to make a difference, Lunchables just has his number, and then with his back against the wall, Thunders somehow adapts. It feels like he has plot armor, he brings it back, and the second set is a blowout. He wins 3-1, the circuit finale. He then follows up this performance with a dominant win at Rewired over Mr. Els and Sosa, 2 of the only remaining players who had winning records over him from prior events in the year, to solidify his number 1 spot. He goes on to be ranked unanimously as the best player in the world on the inaugural edition of PM Rank in 2016. Let's move a year forward. Thunders has still continued to put up great results. He won Bigger Bulk, which is, with the benefit of hindsight, the most stacked Project M 3.6 tournament of all time, as well as Supernova 2 from losers. But he's picked up a nemesis in Malachi, who has a 4-1 set record over him, and most of their sets have not been that close. Furthermore, he's gotten to 3rd place at the last 2 events he's attended, twice in a row to Sosa and Fuzz, who he'd been dominating earlier in the year, giving him 1-2 records against both players. Those 3 players, as well as Thunders, all attend Fair and Balanced, which is a NorCal major that ends up deciding the number 1 spot between Malachi, ThundeRzReign, and Sosa. Going into the event, Thunders is seeded 2nd, but honestly, he's had a pretty bad second half of the year. He has losing records to Malachi, Sosa, and Fuzz. But just like Olympus, when it really counts, he pulls it back. He goes on to beat Sosa Game 5, ending the narrative of losing his last 2 sets to him in surprisingly dominant fashion, and then wins 2 of his 3 sets against Malachi, including a similar scenario to Olympus, where he wins in Winners Finals, gets dominantly 3-0'd in the first set of Grands, including a switch to Falcon on Game 3, and then, just like Olympus, pulls it back with a blowout in the second set of Grand Finals. This still gives him a losing record against Malachi, and an even record against Sosa, and a losing record against Fuzz. But between his earlier wins that year at Bigger Balk and Supernova, and the sheer number of people that he had beaten thanks to the length of his losers runs at those events, as well as his wins over Malachi and Sosa at Fair and Balanced to close out the year, ThundeRzReign barely edges out the #1 spot once again by the skin of his teeth. I cannot stress enough how close the race for first in 2017 was between Malachi and Thunders, even after his win at Fair and Balanced. Within the PM rank panel, we had a dead even split between people who put Malachi higher and people who put Thunders higher, and the difference was quite literally made based on the margin by which people voted and assigned points to who was first and who was second. But Thunders came out on top once again. His ability to win those final events when they mattered helped him clutch out a second year of being #1 player, and really helped him solidify his title as the greatest of all time, because even though in hindsight, both of those years, 2016 and then 2017, were far from a closed race by the end of the year, his ability to win those last events allowed him to dominate the narrative over who was the #1 player and really solidified his greater legacy, where if we look back, we can say without question, really, that Thunders is the greatest of all time, even though really it was contentious whether he was even the #1 for any individual year prior to that one event where everything changed. Let's move on to 2018, which was by all accounts a weird year for Thunders. He was ranked 4th in the world on PM Rank 2018, and only attended 4 events, only playing DK at 2 of them. In January of 2018, he got 5th at Play Pounders 2 to Calm Master and Blank, playing mostly Falcon, and then he got 7th at Cashed Out 2, playing only Ganon. According to him, after Fair and Balanced, he had decided to step back from competing seriously, and his results reflected that. He wasn't playing DK at events, he wasn't really traveling for stuff. And then the even bigger bout rolled around, the biggest Project M event of all time, and he signs out. And we seeded him 3rd because he said he was going to continue playing Falcon and potentially Ganon and other secondaries. And then he went on to win the event. In every set he played, from the start of Top 64 until winners semis, he would play Captain Falcon until his opponent won 2 games, and then he would switch to DK. And then he would win. And he did this against Chevy, he did it against Envy, he did it against South, and then he beats Blank in winners semis without needing the DK. And then, after losing a Game 5 set to Sosa in winners finals, he destroys Blank with DK, and then goes back and resets the bracket, and then 3-0 Sosa to win the even bigger Balk. This was his first tournament playing DK in the year. This was the most dominant year that anyone had ever had in Project M for Sosa. Until this point, Sosa had attended 9 events in 2018. He had won 8 of them, 7 of them from winners. He had lost to 3 people total, and had even or winning records on all of them. That would continue for the rest of 2018. ThundeRzReign would be the only person in the world to have a winning record on Sosa, or to beat him more than once at all in 2018. But that asterisk still remains over Sosa's #1 spot on PM Rank 2018. What if Thunders did travel? What if he did play DK at those 2 events? He would only attend 1 more event in 2018. He would win Fair and Balanced 2 with relative ease over players like the Doctor, Borgman, and Aki, and that would be enough to help him qualify as active for PM Rank 2018. And the ranking panel ended up placing him 4th because we needed a way to balance out those 2 stellar wins at Fair and Balanced 2, and especially at Even Bigger Balk, with the 2 events where he had subpar losses and didn't play DK. And it didn't feel fair to place him above people who had been competing seriously and traveling for the whole year, given how few events he attended. But if there was an event on December 31st of 2018, and all of the top players from 2018 attended, Sosa, Switch, Lunchables, Fuzz, Thunders, the whole crew, I probably would have seeded Thunders #1 again. In all 3 years, 2016, 2017, and 2018, Thunders came into really critical events that, in hindsight, are among the most iconic in Project M's history as an underdog. And he walked out of them controlling the narrative of who is the greatest Project M player of all time, and taking people's breath away at how players who in the past had done quite well against him or even beaten him, he could destroy them in the moments where it mattered most. Players like Lunchables, Malachi, and Sosa, all of whom had dominated Thunders in previous sets. All of those second set of grand finals, at Olympus, at Fair and Balanced, at the even bigger bulk, when it mattered, Thunders could beat anyone. And at the end of the day, that's why he's the greatest player of all time. It's not because in any given year he was head and shoulders above everyone else. It's not because he had dominant winning records across the board against every player. It's because at the biggest events, when it mattered the most, he was the one who came out on top more often than anyone else. And I think that's really interesting to look at in hindsight. Now that we have this history, it's kind of a closed chapter. Going back and looking at really how few moments Thunder's legacy hinged upon, how close he was to not being number one for 2 years, and then, like I said, 2018 is this weird situation where his rank doesn't really reflect his skill, but just how close he was to not having the legacy that he does. And I think that's really interesting, and it goes a long way to talk about how there's more to the story of Project M than meets the eye. It's easy and palatable to talk about easy narratives like Thunders is the greatest player, he's better than everyone else. And that's something that happens a lot because you need to simplify these stories when you make videos like the deep dives, or you write an article series like 3.6 rank, or even on commentary. You don't have time to go into all of the stories and all of the importance behind every single moment and how close everything is, because you're trying to tell a cohesive story that's important and interesting to viewers. But sometimes it is worth taking a step back and just realizing how little it would take to change everything. And there are so many points where this all could have gone differently. So, that's all I have to say. I was thinking about this and thought it was interesting, so I turned it into a video. I hope people enjoyed it. At some point, I'll start making the deep dives again. I've just been kind of burned out on them recently, and I don't want to make things that I'm not excited about, because I think that will come across in the quality of the videos. But I will start making them again at some point, I'm sure, as well as random other things as they catch my attention. So, thank you for the support, and stay tuned for more.
Soar!